say a word about the organization. The first sponsor is the Seroptimus International Grenada, SIG. Loris Pascal is its current president, and I believe you're there, Loris. Loris.
Hi.
Greetings.
Greetings from the Seroptimus International Grenada. President of the Seroptimus International Grenada, Jacqueline Loris Pascal. Hi, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Good. Next is the Caribbean Male Action Network, a men's organization of the Caribbean community. We have a representative.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kevin Liverpool. I am the administrator of the Regional Secretariat of the Caribbean Male Action Network. We are a network of individuals and organizations across the Caribbean region that work on transforming masculinities and on engaging men and boys in gender equality. I want to acknowledge Mr. Tyrone Buckmeyer, who is here with us, who is the immediate past chairman, who has really mentored me into this role. We are really interested in forming a deep network across the Caribbean to promote gender equality. I'm really proud with our colleagues in Grenada and our partners for putting on such already a successful event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Welcome. Don't speak too quickly. And our third sponsor is Grenada's Legal Aid and Counseling Service, a project of Grenada. Tyrone?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of our team here at Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic, I am pleased to join the other sponsors in welcoming you all to what we hope will be a very interesting conversation this afternoon. We're very pleased to see the large number of persons who have so far signed on, and we know that others have registered. Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic has been in existence since 1988. We are indeed a project of Grenada Community Development Agency. We're a non-governmental organization which offers a wide range of services, including legal representation, public education, advocacy, legal research, and counseling. We are proud to be the only service provider of this kind in Grenada, and we're very proud to be a part of this conversation today. So again, thank you all very much, and we look forward to an interesting discussion.
Thank you very much. This activity is being live streamed on the Grenada Broadcasting Network, GBN.
Wow.
Thank you, GBN. And according to my screen, we are now up to 95 participants. So there is some interest there. Our panelists. Let me also ask our panelists to introduce themselves. Dr. Damian Greaves, please introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Damian Greaves, and I like to introduce myself as a Caribbean man par excellence, gentle people, who happen to have been born in St. Lucia, formative schooling in Barbados, now living in Grenada, but I've traveled the length and breadth of the Caribbean. I'm a lecturer, I'm a professor at St. George's University in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, School of Arts and Sciences. My interests lie in sociology, politics, but also public health. And I hope that this afternoon we can have a very rich discussion. We're going to share ideas with you, and then we will let the discussion ensue, and we will let the ideas contend.
Thank you, Professor Graves. Our second panelist is Ms. Tony Broder. Are you there, Tony?
Hi, yes, Tony Broadva. I guess after that introduction, I'm also a Caribbean woman par excellence. I'm Grenadian born to a Jamaican and a Bajan, and one of my ancestors was also born in Carriacou, close ancestors. I believe firmly in the Caribbean project, and in order for that project to be realized, we need to have equality, both and race and ethnic and class equality, and that's something that I'm looking forward to discussing a bit more when.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. You didn't say where you were born, but we will just have
Trinidad and Tobago.
But you'll carry the Caracou flag as well tonight. And our third and final panelist is Mr. Richie Maitland.
Yes. Hello, everybody. Richie Maitland. In the vein of the precedent set, I am a Caribbean man. I was born and grown and currently live in Grenada. Actually, I was born in Caracou, Tony. I don't know if you know. My mom is from Petit Martinique, so when the contractions hit her, she had to travel down to Caracou to go to the hospital because Petit Martinique didn't have a hospital. So I think my navel string is buried in Caracou.
Caracou as well.
Yeah, so human rights and constitutional law are my areas of academic specialism.
Very good, and welcome again.
Thank you.
So this is the lineup. These are our three presenters, and all of you, the other 92 of you, are our participants. Now, we'll proceed as follows. I'll make some brief introductory remarks to set it in context, and then you will then hear from Professor Graves, followed by Ms. Broadbar, followed by Richie Maitland. Then there will be a discussion among and between them, and then I believe we've got a support person who is helping me field questions so we could actually call on you, raise your hand, and we can get your discussion going. So by setting the context, let me say the following. In a recent blog a few weeks ago, I argued that the COVID-19 pandemic provided an aha moment, an unprecedented opportunity to turn toward a true transformation as we face this great disease with its potential to kill, but also with the opportunity to get us to practice new rules and thus to survive. One can argue similarly for the Black Lives Matter movement, that very much like COVID, Black Lives Matter seems bent on going global, the way it has already moved rapidly around the world. But very unlike COVID, Black Lives Matter is designed to heal, not hurt, and to save lives, not to destroy. Now, apart from going global, the similarity is in the opportunity both present. The opportunity to interrogate the situation, the condition, and the circumstances of people's lives, and to extract from that examination and support a commitment to going forward with greater clarity, as I've already said, healing, and I must add, an all-round transformation. The opportunity provided is that we should never be or behave the same way after COVID-19 or after the unleashing of the Black Lives movement in 2020. In keeping with the ethos of the social network, Black Lives Matter, the expectation is that transformation will result in the form of ending discrimination and violence, poverty, exclusion, and racism in all its manifestations against Black people. What is Black Lives Matter, and is it relevant to Grenada? Can an analysis of the intersectionality of race, class, and gender help us better understand the movement and perhaps answer the question of relevance? Our panel, as we said, is assembled here to explore this with you, the public. Now, Black Lives Matter was founded by 3 Black women who remain at its leadership, at the helm. They are Opal Timeti, a Nigerian-born U.S. counselor and writer, Patrice Coulor and Alicia Garza, from the California area, both of them. And all three were activists before the formation of Black Lives Matter. There is also the Movement for Black Lives. It seems to be a looser affiliate network, and it's associated with the Black Lives Matter. And I suppose our panelists will give us more clarity on these. Black Lives Matter is 6 years old. It's a campaign of activism and advocacy to improve the lives of Black people by campaigning against, particularly that was against active and over-policing in Black and brown communities, extrajudicial killings by the police and even by civilians. And it was formed to campaign for basic services and resources for low-income communities, again, of color, Black and brown. The organizers say they intend to shine a light on racism that is facing the 13% of the US population that is African American. Well, there'll be more on it as we go along, but that should give you a basic introduction on the Black Lives Movement. The second context I want to give you is a little bit on the history, historically about Black people, and one international initiative. Well, historically, the Black race has suffered the worst human rights violation in modern history. That is forced removal from their homeland, forced transatlantic journey, triangular trade.
Scotia accounts, I need that bank account details.
I think Mr. Lambert needs to mute his mic.
Huh?
They will take it back from the short.
There you go.
Thank you. Right, so it's the common history of the Black people that is a historical commonality here, whether it's the US or Grenada, because 10 million women, men, and children were taken from Africa and brought to the Americas, North, South, Central, and the Caribbean, where they were enslaved. So the racial identity of being Black and slavery of 400 years is the common experience of the large majority of Black people outside of Africa today. That's the first context. And the second and last context I'd like to present is the following. In December 2014, the United Nations General Assembly proclaimed Resolution 68-237, and it proclaimed the International Decade of People of African Descent. And the decade ran from 2015 until 2024. So we are just about halfway through. And this decade has adopted the theme, and I quote, people of African descent, recognition, justice, and development. So that, and you can look at UNESCO, there's a lot more that clarifies what the decade is all about, its justification, its ambitions, and so on, its rationale, which we can come to. So that's the context for me. What is the Black Lives Movement? The common experience of slavery in the Americas, and the International Decade for People of African Descent. Let me now turn to our panel and invite our first panelist, Professor Graves. You have the floor, sir, for 5, no more than 7 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you very much. Now, good afternoon, gentle people. I want to say I'm very happy to be here. And what our moderator has presented is so deep, it is so profound that I think we can begin asking questions now, because she has really set the tone of what is happening. I want to preface my comments by looking at by looking at this statement that I dreamed some time ago. We may not be contiguous geographically, or we may not be close geographically or physically, but we are historically and socially connected. So whether you talk about the United States or Canada or the Caribbean or Africa in and of itself. Wherever we go, we are talking about, we may not be geographically close, but we are historically and socially connected. Our history can be suggested to be weaved in a social tapestry of inequality, inequity, injustice, unequal opportunity, racism, discrimination. We can look at gender, we can look at ethnicity, we can look at color, because there are different gradations as we traverse the various areas across the globe. One thing we do know, our moderator touched on it, slavery, as well as colonialism, and by extension neocolonialism, has left a lingering imprint on the lives of African peoples all over the globe. And when we talk about that lingering imprint in terms of the slave trade, the transatlantic trade, we talk about the disparities that emanated, the disparities in wealth, the disparities in health, the disparities in education, in housing, in all of those social areas that we can talk about. And this then talks to us or speaks to us about the Black Lives Matter movement, which our moderator has already suggested is a global movement, whose mission is anti-racist advocacy, protest to eradicate white supremacy, to intervene in power relations, to intervene in violence inflicted on Blacks, both by the state, and let us not forget vigilantes. So this is what we are seeing happening. Our question is, can we relate that to events recently in Grenada, in the recent past, or events over the decades, over the centuries in Grenada? I want to suggest to you that there are 4 different areas that bring to us a convergence of thought, what I call a convergence of thought, a convergence of philosophy, a convergence of purpose, also a convergence of anxiety. We can begin with what the moderator spoke of at the level of the UN, of the International Decade for People of African Descent, 2015 to 2024. And then we can talk about Black Lives Matter, born in 2013, with Trayvon Martin and the Zimmerman scenario. And we can also bring in the Windrush affair of Britain, those voyages between 1948 and 1971, where there is a question and a crisis of citizenship for those who made those voyages and the children of those who made those voyages, who today have to fight for their citizenship and have to fight for equality, equity, and justice. And then we can marry the convergence of thought to the Caribbean Reparations Commission, recently born, led by its chair, the indomitable Sir Hilary Beckles, and of course, the researcher, the deputy chair, Professor Vereen Shepherd. So what do we see here? We see a convergence among all of those 4 entities, or those 4, you can call them 4 movements if you want to, where there is what you call parallel ideas on what has happened to the Black race, what has happened to Black people all over the world. When we come to Grenada, in its application of what is happening over there in terms of Black Lives Matter in the United States, and you want to apply it to Grenada, and by extension the Caribbean, let's not leave out the Caribbean here, although we're talking about Grenada, we have to engage what we call the interplay of race, class, and gender in the Caribbean. The question is, the recent Port Judy affair, where a dog was involved, owned by white expats, and I think everybody knows about that. I don't need to go into the detail of that. But the question is, can we in fact borrow heavily from the Black Lives Matter movement, from the whole business of racism and the realities of racism, systemic racism, structural racism in the United States, and apply it to the Grenada or even the Caribbean scenario. I would think that we have to understand that there's what you call, in terms of the race, class, and gender, and we want to examine the interplay, we have to talk about the social construction of that reality. What is the social construction of reality in the United States and in Britain versus the social construction of reality in Grenada and by extension the Caribbean? And I pose these questions because I'm not here to preach or to lecture to anybody. I am here to basically bring to the fore certain ideas that can then be discussed among the panel, and of course with the wide variety of, with the 95 of us who I understood are now on set. So I pose these questions. When we look at Grenada, what really is
You have 2 more minutes, Professor.
Yes. What is the dominant source of rivalry? Does the interplay of the forces of race, class, and gender depend on the prevailing, 1, internal conditions, 2, prevailing external conditions, or both? Where is the color paradigm in all of this? Where is the ethnic paradigm in all of this, especially if you take into consideration Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago? Race, class, and gender, we're saying, are socially constructed, which means that they emerge out of group struggles for valued resources. And can we leave out systems of power relations that go beyond lifestyle, that go beyond cultural beliefs, that go beyond values, that go beyond practices? I want to suggest, therefore, finally, that race, class, and gender, taken into consideration Black Lives Matter, the Caribbean Reparations Commission, the Windrush affair, what we need to understand is that race, class, and gender are power hierarchies in which one group exerts control over another, securing its position of dominance in the system. And we are saying, therefore, that substantial material and non-material sources are at stake. This is my opening salvo. There's a lot more to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So you ask whether there are parallels that can be borrowed heavily from the movement of Black Lives Matter construction in the United States to help us get at some of the thorny issues here in the Caribbean. You identify, of course, the recent, let's call it the Fort Judy event or the Fort Judy affair, but you mention also Windrush, reparations movement, and you suggest that there is a crisis, or you ask, is there a crisis of citizenship for the populations concerned, whether here or in the United States, the broad question of citizenship?
Absolutely.
Is there a framework of dominance and hierarchy that can help to explain this crisis that you posit?
Absolutely.
So let us turn now to Ms. Broadbar. Tony, you pick it up from there, please.
So, taking it from where Dr. Graves was, I think we have to also look specifically at Black Lives Matter movement and what they say they stand for. And if anyone goes to their website, you can see one of the first things they say is that they see themselves as part of a global Black family, and that there are the different ways in which we're impacted or privileged as Black people who exist in different parts of the world. Because African Americans, of course, are benefiting from certain kinds of privileges that are associated with the American nationality.
Yes.
Now, slides, I'm not sure if the tech colleagues can put them up, but what I'm going to do in my 5 to 7 minutes is really look at intersectionality, because often when we talk about Black Lives Matter in the state, it's very clear to us what is happening when we see Black bodies being treated by state institutions. However, we don't necessarily always look at the ways in which Black women and Black men are how the root causes of racism and the root causes of gender inequality affect our reality, our safety, and our ability to really contribute the most that we can to our societies. I'm sure many of you saw the West Indies cricket team this morning taking their own knee to stand for Black Lives Matter in England. And I mean, when I first saw it, I got a bit of tears. You know, recently we lost the last of the 3 Ws, and to see the men standing in England in this way was very, very empowering. And then I started to think, you know, the last time the women won first, were we as excited about the women's win as we were the men's win? And how does this in any way relate to our history of colonialism, slavery, and anything else? Can you go to the next slide, please? What I want to say is, while we may be right now in a specific situation of crisis, some may call it, we do have to acknowledge that we have made significant gains. And the gains have not been equal across different segments of the Black community, of the Caribbean community, of the human space. But there have been gains that have been made since colonialism ended officially, the formal forms of colonialism ended officially. One of the things that I think we have to be speaking about clearly are the different ways in which oppression affects human beings. There's the ideological oppression, and that's the system of beliefs or ideas. And for most of us dealing in these spaces, we would say the belief or idea is one of white supremacy. And a lot of us feel very uncomfortable with words like white supremacy or even words like patriarchy, because we think, this is so heavy, what does it mean? But it is basically when, for example, in Trinidad and Tobago, someone say, if you're not red, you're dead. For lighter skinned Black people. That is white supremacy at work, right? Institutional, ideological, and these beliefs are actually then integrated into our institutions. So the laws, slavery was legal at one point, right? Women were not able to have the same rights as men under the law, right? So different forms of oppression are also then perpetuated through our institutions. Then the interpersonal. And this is something that we don't always like to discuss, but that is the way in which we treat each other. And the way that not only this anti-Blackness and white supremacy or misogyny in the case of women's empowerment manifests itself between women, between men and women, so between persons in similar groups or separate groups. And then the internalized. I don't think Marcus Garvey and
yes, Gab.
Sorry, I think you might have to mute your mic, BBH. Yes. Care economy at work again. So I don't think that Marcus Garvey and Bob Marley, when repeating him, were out. We always quote it, but we don't actually live it. It is uncomfortable, but we have internalized these beliefs as well. It is easy to look externally to the States and see what is happening there, but we have to be looking at how we have internalized these beliefs about white supremacy and misogyny. The next slide, please. I started with the 4 eyes of oppression because I wanted us to start thinking about the fact that the oppression that many women face, the oppression faced by marginalized and vulnerable groups, and the oppression faced by Black people all affect us at the same time differently. And this is something also that the Black Lives Matter movement speaks to when they say that they will build a space that affirms Black women and is free from sexism, misogyny, and environments in which men are centered. Right now, most of the debates around Black Lives Matter are around the loss of life faced by Black men. And that has to be highlighted while we also highlight the fact that Black women's vulnerabilities don't necessarily lie with the states. They lie within our communities. And that is something that we have to address in terms of how colonialism, how slavery, and the white supremacy that came with it was internalized by us. How is that affecting how we treat one another? How we see beauty, how we see value, how we see worth? What we see in terms of masculinity and femininity in terms of vulnerabilities. When we see a woman in a park in New York calling the police for a black man in a very particular way, a white woman doing it in a very particular way, it strikes a chord because we can see that some of the notions about vulnerability and weakness and femininity, she was playing on that to get her way. How do we see that replicated throughout our region? And even in Grenada, I am not there, y'all are on the ground there, y'all will have a better understanding of the ways in which this is playing out. Next slide, please. End with some conversation about intimate partner violence in the Caribbean. And I just want you to know that on, I believe it's the 21st of August, we will be launching the results of a prevalence survey that was completed in Grenada. So you will know the rates of violence against women and girls in Grenada. So stay tuned for that. In the Caribbean, and this should shock us because I can't remember, I was listening to someone and it is, I believe one European leader said it was Russian. I think it was Lenin or Lenin who said, one death is a tragedy, many are statistics, right? So when we look at 55% of Guyanese women saying that in their life, they have experienced intimate partner violence, some form of it. And we are not thinking that that is a crisis. And what does this mean about the ways in which slavery and colonialism have affected the gender relations in our communities? When we see in Jamaica, it's 39%, Suriname, 48%, and Trinidad and Tobago, 44%. We have to say something is not right. And when we are talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and the inequalities around race, we need to be looking for a co-creation, and I'm using the words of the Black Lives Matter movement again, a co-creation of a culture of our space that is not just about supplementing one group with another group of power. So we just want to put Black men in the place where in the hierarchy of rankings that we have white men. It has to be a reimagining of value in our society. And it is going to be uncomfortable, but it is something that we need to discuss. And if you go to the next slide, please, you'll see what the current prevalence of any kind. So that's any woman living right now. On this call, we have 108 people. 25 at least of them, if they were women, would be experiencing violence, intimate partner violence in their life right now. Right now. So these are the things that we have to start saying, okay, it's not only that the power dynamics in our space have been polluted by white supremacy, and I actually think that some of the misogyny that we experience is deeply influenced by white supremacy in our notions of who should be head of household and all of these kinds of things. When we start to interrogate it, it gets very uncomfortable. So I will end with a slide that speaks to Decima's initial point about the decade, the International Decade for People of African Descent, which is a critical decade, which was silent. I was so excited in 2015 when it launched, and then there was nothing. And now Black Lives Matter and everyone is excited about it again. And interestingly, it's 5 years in. So this is excellent. We have 5 more years. And just to let you know that even within the UN, we are coming to terms with the fact that our institution was created at the cusp of the colonial era. So even the way in which the development industry works, we have been sitting down thinking through. It is one thing to make sure that we are learning from each other. And that is a fantastic platform that the UN provides. But we cannot be a space where because we have parachuted into spaces from another country or wherever else, think that we have all the answers for a space. So I think this is a critical moment for all of us to get a little bit uncomfortable, but remain respectful in the way in which we communicate. It is not going to be easy. People are not always going to say the right thing, but we have to continue to to have the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, you opened with a bar that went straight to the global by reminding us that the BLM, Black Lives Matter movement, it sees its global reach as intentional, and that taking a knee by our West Indian male cricketers rightly it globalizes the U.S. taking a knee action, but it also allows for a very emotional understanding of the kind of solidarity and commonality that can be exercised. Thank you for that. And also the fact that you're asking us to come home, to not see this call for interrogation as something purely external to our very lives, but our relationships, male, female, black, white, and so on, are very intimate and close relations that have to be investigated and reconfigured, reimagined. Mm-hmm. So we take some of that call for reimagination. That's what human rights movements have been about. And we get input now from Richie Maitland, who will take us there. Richie?
Okay. So hello, everybody. I agree with really all of the points that the previous speakers have made. So I think it's important to note that the issues that affect Black people in the Caribbean are also the same and different than the issues affecting Black people in the United States. And I think in order for us to address and really fix our issues, we have to acknowledge both the fact of the globalization of racism. So Black people are treated like shit everywhere, really across the globe. Negative assumptions are made about Black people everywhere across the globe, but its manifestation in particular nationalized spaces is different. So, for instance, one of the things about the Caribbean is that we are majority Black societies. And a few consequences of that is, for instance, that our prime ministers are Black, our business leaders are Black. So we, and also experientially, I don't have to worry about a security following me around in a store, or I don't have the same fear that Black Americans do if I'm stopped by the police, because I'm relatively sure that the exchange will be one that doesn't leave me vulnerable to some kind of abuse. But at the same time, the fact of slavery and the ideological underpinning of slavery, the way that it created this ideology, this idea that Black people and Blackness is lesser, it still subsists to this very day. And we have to acknowledge that in the Caribbean, that although it might be different from the United States, that we still face our own forms of racism. We see it in, for instance, shadism, the idea that lighter skinned people are automatically perceived as more attractive. We see it in how people insult each other. So, for instance, you always hear people say, oh, you're so Black and stupid, you're Black and ugly. And Black in that context is used as its own derogative, as if somehow being Black is just automatically negative, such that it can be an insult. And we also see it institutionally. And the event that you referred to in Grenada, Info Judy, was absolutely telling of that. Now, much of the reporting around the issue, I won't mention the people's names because it's currently before the court, so I don't want to create any sort of pre-trial publicity that can be prejudicial. So I wouldn't really mention it in any specific detail, just conceptually in generalities. But it was a white family who beat a Black man because their dog had been killed accidentally. Now, my wife and I have dogs. We have 2 dogs. If any of them are killed, we would, naturally speaking, get upset. And, in a particular situation, might probably respond not as our best selves. But I feel like what was the issue that a lot of Grenadian people had is the fact of the police saying, well, we're not going to treat this as a criminal issue. If you all want to pursue it, you have to do it civilly. I have operated as a criminal defense attorney in Grenada for 5 years. And I am absolutely certain that if it had, for instance, been a white family, let's say, driving through Dabo, and they bunged somebody's dog, and a black family had come out and attacked the driver and beat them up, they would have been charged immediately. So there is this way that there is a double standard that exists for reasons specific to slavery and colonialism, where even in our own countries where we are majority black, institutionally speaking, there is sort of a deference that automatically more or less applies to white people that we as black local residents don't enjoy. And that was exactly the issue. So some people have tried to frame the argument as, they disagree with the framing because they don't feel that the white family beat the guy because he was black. And that may be so, but the issue is the police's response, which is what angered many people, which is what angered me and my family, because I was actually, part of the protest. And that is important to note because there is a manifestation of that here, and it sort of ties into class as well, just because the area that the incident occurred was in Fort Judy, where the family involved, the aggressors, let's say, alleged aggressors lived, and that is an area associated with affluence and wealth. And that cannot be analyzed just by itself in silo. Just because if we accept our history for what it is, then we know, for instance, that the families, the people who have been able to enjoy privilege by virtue of wealth tend to be white or fair-skinned families, just because from the days of the plantocracy, back in the days when we had the plantations, those are the families who had access to the most important form of capital, that is land, and that wealth has transitioned through generations. So in the Eastern Caribbean, even if it is not so much that people see race and treat with you on the basis of race, which is definitely the case, people definitely treat with you on the basis of race, class ties into that insofar as the people who tend to be higher class tend to be of a particular color for historic reasons, which is not to say that we don't have black affluent families, which we absolutely do. But it's important to know that intersection. And I think we as panelists have been kind of operating from or speaking from a particular level of or assumption of audience. So just for the people who just might not have been familiar with these academic discussions, I want to explain what we mean when we say intersectionality. So nobody is one distinct thing. I am not only black, I'm also a man, which is a distinct category. I'm also Caribbean, which is a distinct category. Each category carries with it a particular level of advantage or disadvantage in moving through this world. So whereas I might be black and, as a matter of statistics, people would tend to treat with me in a particular way. I'm also a lawyer, I relatively well connected, so that affords me a level of advantage. And it's important to speak about women in this regard, because the reality is black women tend to be at the very bottom of advantage and opportunities for advantage, and in multiple ways. So specific to the Eastern Caribbean, which is, I live in the Eastern Caribbean, I understand it the most. We have, over the last 10 years, been either first or second place in domestic violence. We have been absolutely first place in relation to child sexual abuse, which also tends to affect girls. And those are issues that we need to address, because if we're speaking about Black Lives Matter, the lives that are affected by child sexual abusers are also Black. The women who are beaten and killed in the Caribbean are also Black. And those lives also matter. But those stories tend not to be foregrounded in the discussion because they are women and they need to be. So I absolutely agree with Tony. And that is the importance of intersectionality. And I would like to see us just more foregrounding Black women's stories as part of the narrative. So that it won't just be a wholesale importation of, Black people being killed, Black men being killed, and we want justice for Black men. Because looking at the international news that had been generated, it was focused around George Floyd, for instance, in the United States. That was the sort of catalyst. That was the single incident that sort of sparked things off. But there are also women's stories that are equally as offending, as egregious. There's a story, I don't recall her name, but a woman who was killed in her bed because the police shot indiscriminately, and somehow that story just is not as prevalent. And I think it definitely has to do for reasons of gender. And we have to understand the ways in which an acceptance of any system of oppression creates a precedent for other systems of oppression. So insofar as we say, it's all right to somehow discriminate against women for XYZ reasons, as an axis of difference, then that creates a precedence of okayness, so to speak, for treating, generally speaking, Black people differently. And one of the things that, sort of hurt me as a Grenadian is a few years ago, 2016, 2017, we had 2 minutes.
2 more.
All right, sure. We had an initiative to change our constitution, and part of the changes proposed was to put in provisions which specifically spoke to women's equality. Because the reality is, in the Caribbean, even if we look, for instance, in the legal profession, yes, more women are going to law school or medical school and achieving positions, but still, women tend to earn less. And when you look at the other categorical demographics of women, so poor categories of women who may not have access to medical or law school, then they definitely tend to be more unemployed than the men involved. And we as Grenadian citizens, because our constitution required citizens to agree to the constitutional changes, actually rejected the provisions that related to women's equality. And much of it was because people sought to tie it in with propaganda saying that somehow that would open the door for LGBT rights. But I think it was much easier for people to accept that argument because the people, the category who would have benefited were women. And I think that is absolutely a reality. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richie. You certainly brought it home. If I could pull out some of the points that jumped out of me, you began to answer the question whether there is relevance by saying that there is sameness and difference, and therefore the importance of particularity. We cannot buy wholesale. We've got to, you said, the commonality there is that Black people are treated differently and worse everywhere in the world.
Oh, yeah.
Everywhere in the world. I mean, I've traveled extensively and I've seen quite a bit of that. You made another point about Black is a marker of negativity. That, Black people did this. There's a little video that we received recently of a small child who was being asked, why did you do this? And who took the cookie sort of thing? And she said, a Black man. And she wasn't even 3 years old.
Yeah.
So it's an early development. The third point you made was that deference, affluence, and privilege is grafted onto, associated with being white. White privilege, white deference, and white affluence. These are experiences that we in the Caribbean, particularly deference and affluence, associate with that. But you answered race as a complex construct in the region, color and shade, and what it means. You answered the question of the multiplicities of our reality. That as a Caribbean man, professional, you didn't say light skin, so probably you think you're brown.
Well, I am brown, but I'm also just relative to the general population, light skin, and I acknowledge the privilege that comes with that. That's part of my truth.
And I liked your establishment of the hierarchy and your honesty and self-reflection that puts somebody like you in the middle, and that Black women are always at the bottom.
Oh, yeah.
They're always presumed to be at the bottom. You can be a professor, Black female professor, you can be a Black physician. Somebody will walk into the store and see you shopping and assume that you're the seller, somebody there to sell, not to buy. It's happened. So you've begun to help us go deeply on this journey of, is there utility in looking at what happens and transpires in the U.S. in analyzing our own experience? And of course, you talked about the Fort Judy incident. Let me now ask the three of you then to comment on what you have heard from each other in relation to our main question. Can we look at race relations in the same way in Grenada as in the United States? You've begun to answer that already. You might want to expand on that. And if yes, we've laid out some factors why they are in common and some factors why not. And what is the global dimension? If we can drill down a little bit on the global element of the Black Lives Matter movement, that might be of relevance here. Professor Greaves, would you like to kick us off again? You have to unmute. Let's see, you have to unmute.
There is relevance because we have seen, as I said, when I spoke, I alluded to the fact that there are certain historical realities. We know what has happened in terms of the enslaved and the enslaver. We know what has happened in terms of all of those issues that obtained in regard to the inequalities and the inequities and the injustices and so on. There's no doubt about that. Coming to Grenada, we have to take that into account. Coming to Grenada, coming to the Eastern Caribbean, or by extension the rest of the Caribbean, there are certain things that we need to take into account, and I agree with Richie. When we talk about the whole concept of class, there are two variants of class that we can take into account. We can take the Marxist variant of class where we are talking about strictly some people being worker and some people owning, right? But we can take the Weberian variant, which suggests that when you look at class, you have to break it down further into power, privilege, status. As we discussed yesterday and today as well, so Richie spoke about his profession. He's a lawyer. I can't remember where he said he lives. Where did you say you live again, Richie?
See, I live in town, Church Street.
Right. So that makes a difference. Richie living in St. Patrick would make a difference to Richie living in St. George.
I agree.
The way Richie speaks would make a difference. People look at language, how you pronounce words. I say that to my students all the time. They judge you on the way you speak. So they immediately judge what, and we talk about kayaks. And I didn't know about kayaks until my students told me kayaks are from Carriacou. And they may speak differently. And they may speak differently. I come from St. Lucia. I am from the rural area. And when I had to change because I guess I travel a lot. But from the eastern village of Dennery, I used to say things like fish. How much for your fish? I had to change it because I got a lot of peer pressure when I went into town. And my friends in town said to me, listen, you don't say fish, you say fish. But there's the French influence. Is that French Creole influence that people don't understand? And again, it's a situation. I mean, Richard, you put that beautifully. It's gradations. It's if you are black, that is one thing. If you are black and educated, that is uneducated. That is another. If you are a black woman who is uneducated, that is another dimension. There are gradations. Code noir, shades of, again, the code noir. Shades of color. You're 1/8 black, 1/4 black, 1/6 black, 1/32 black, 1/64 black. That is what we have been socialized to. Those are the social markers that we have come out with. So it is a complex issue. It has to take into account also occupation. I often say to people, you may be a teacher in the primary school, you will be treated differently to a teacher in a secondary school, and a teacher at TAMCC, and a teacher at the university. Within the same secondary school, you may be treated differently if you're a teacher of math and science versus a teacher of agricultural science or industrial arts. It is just, again, the social construction of our reality, such that we even begin to talk about people, if you want to pursue agriculture, which is a beautiful subject, or you decide that you want to do something in agriculture, people would look at you and say, well, why you want to do that? Why you want to associate with that? A young lady went to the Ministry of Agriculture right here in Grenada and said she wants a piece of land because she heard about land for the landless and so on. And the individual looked at her and said, what qualifications do you have? She says, I have CXCs. What did he say to her? So why you need land? You already have CXCs. Why don't you go on to another? Why don't you go to a higher level of learning? So it is status, it is privilege, it is how you speak, it is where you live, it is your religion as well. All of these issues have to come into play. Very complex.
Thank you. Tony, are you interested in?
There are a few things because I'm trying to catch up on the chat as well, right? So based on what Damien was saying, yes, and Richie, thanks for breaking that down for me. I was rushing, and usually I would break it down that we are many things. Really come from the fact that we place value on the things that we are. And from a universal perspective, when you think about the ideologies that influence us, anti-Blackness is thing that places significant value on where we are. There's a reason why agriculture in the Caribbean is not valued, but in Europe, if you are a farmer, it is the best thing in the world. The state supports you. If you are angry, people are scared. Not only the Europe, but also the US. We have a challenge with agriculture and work on the land because of our slave past.
I agree.
Trying to get very, very far from it. So all of the things that Damien raised, when you come back to the root cause of it, you will find colonialism, slavery, and the anti-Blackness that they produce at the root cause of it, and misogyny. Because some of the things that you've discussed are usually associated with male or female. So
absolutely.
When it was a male profession in the Caribbean, because it was a very upstanding, respectable position. Now that it is mainly women in the position, it is no longer so. So I think the fact that acknowledge, respect, and celebrate the differences and commonalities that we have in the Caribbean. And going back to your question, and not just the Caribbean, the world, we are different. We are different shades. You know, we're all one human family, but we are different. The issue is that we are placing value, and based on that value, power and privilege, or lack thereof, on that difference. And I think at this stage, we have to be thinking about two things. Generally, Caribbean, the African diaspora, and this is what is beautiful about this decade, the African diaspora and the Caribbean in particular has been at the helm of the civil rights movement in the US. We know where his mother was from, right? Marcus Garvey, Jamaica, Amy Jakes Garvey, the two Amy Garveys, right, that were influencing him. Shirley Chisholm, the first woman to run for president. All Caribbean people. And I think we have to also acknowledge, if Haiti's revolution never happened, where would we be right now?
I agree.
Lots of things that we can share and we should be learning from. We don't only need to be looking to the States to guide us. But what we do need to be taking from the States is an understanding that this kind of inequality of value is perpetuated in our institutions, and that requires us to organize in a very particular way. It is perpetuated by our ideology, which makes us uncomfortable, but we also need to address that in a particular way. It is perpetuated between our relationships, and we have to figure that out in one way, and then individually. You know, when in the mirror, when I was a young girl, we used to put skirts on our head to flip it like, you know, we were saying it's this, and you want it to be blue because our notion of beauty was not black.
Yeah.
Although we left colonialism, how far have our institutions moved from? These are the things we need to talk about. And then 2 things in the chat I just want to address quickly because I know we're going to have to wrap up.
Yes, very quickly so we can get
very quickly. It is important that when we talk about lives, and this is the UN Human Charter is clear, all human life. In the Black Lives Matter movement, they also speak very, very clearly in space for transgender brothers and sisters. They speak about the gay, lesbian community. And I want to know in the Caribbean, when we look clearly at what Black Lives Matter stands for, do we all continue to support it? Right? When we talk about UN Women, we're talking about all women because we can't say only these women. We work for women and men across the world. So that is something that I just wanted to state. And then the last thing about how we look at, I don't like talking about, I don't usually use terms like redistribution. How does the state generally see social protection? And this is something that the Caribbean is actually doing well at. Can you imagine globally we do well at this? How do we support people having equal opportunity through social protection? So when we have these conversations, all I would like for us to do is be very specific then about the targeted ways in which we can find solutions.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you for this multi-level response. Richie?
Yeah, so what I would say, I just want to make points on the 2 general headings. The first heading is that besides the other categories or axes of advantage or disadvantage that we've discussed, so whether it's race or gender, there's also nationality and how geopolitics kind of plays into that, even at the level of the Caribbean countries. So for instance, KFC is a major institution in every Caribbean country. People just kind of love it and gravitate towards it. But for me, it's not that necessarily that their food tastes better than our locally cooked or produced food. It's just the association with Americanness, so to speak. So, outside of our understandings of the value of race or the value of gender, there's also the value that we place on foreigners, which is a problem and which ties in intersectionally with race and gender. I also wanted to say that I absolutely loved Tony's categorization of, a sort of essentializing of the issue as based on a valuation of particular color, on a global level, in a context in which blackness is just devalued or undervalued. And I agreed with that because, for instance, I have a son who is a year and a half, and there was one incident that happened that just kind of bothered me that my wife and I spoke about, where he was by a grandparent, and as soon as we reached with the child, the grandparents' comment, it was about his nose and how broad it was, like how we have such a broad nose, which of course broadness of nose is a black feature. There's also the issue of locks, where, for instance, I've spoken to people in my parents' generation who have said that in their day, nobody who was black or very black could get a job at the banks. Now, that has been recently changing. Or even nobody who had locks, because locks, I feel like contemporarily is one of the issues that we have to face. So I recall, for instance, just up to a few years ago, I had locks. When I first started law school, I wanted to do a summer internship with one of the firms here. I won't name them. I sent in my grades and my transcripts. I was accepted. And the Monday that I got in, and they realized I had locks, the principal at the firm refused to shake my hand. Man tell me go and cut my locks and come back. So all of that ties into an erasure of blackness. So it's not just how For instance, it's not just about societies being violent toward black bodies, it's just a sort of violence towards blackness and expressions of blackness. OBI is still criminalizing Grenada. African or traditionally black spirituality is still criminalized many places around the globe. So we just have to, I really think, interrogate how it is we internalize our own valuation of blackness as Caribbean people, and that's important.
I think too, Madam Moderator, one of the things we have to look at in terms of the United States, if we look at the Black Lives Matter movement, it really coalesced around the whole business of the criminalization in the United States in terms of what was happening from the point of view of the state and the police, how they treated blacks. So a lot of it came out of the shooting of blacks by police and so on. It is something I think that we need to take into account, because in 2013, that is where it really wrote. I mean, they have spoken about other things, but central to it was the whole business of how black people have been treated in the United States insofar as what happens with the law and things of that nature. And that is a part, I think, that we have to also take into account, Richie.
Thank you. So, crime, criminality, and the criminalization of black behavior.
Blackness.
And blackness.
Yeah.
So that's a good point for us to get back to the Fort Judy incident, since I know it's on many people's minds. And then we can come back out with more general discussion, because this is really important, the understanding of race and the expressions of racism, its commonalities and differences in Grenada versus United States. And therefore, can we use that same language, that same understanding to characterize let's say I'm a citizen and I'm not making any legal judgment here, to categorize what is thought to be a criminal activity between black and white in Grenada. Was there an appropriateness of seeing it as a racial action? Somebody reminded us that both of the couples were non-Grenadians. So there's a nationality factor.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true though.
I'm not sure. I shouldn't repeat what I don't know. But I'm saying that let's put to rest this part of the discussion, because those who say there was no race involved. The family was very angry, and they did what anybody would have done: pull a man out of his car, beat him up, and so on.
Well, I'd like to add
comments from you quickly, and then we're going to open the mic. Open the mic. So quickly from you.
All right. So first of all, I don't think it's what anybody would have done, because that would not have been my response, as much as I might have been angry. I mean, with my family, our dogs are part of our family. They literally are house dogs. They live in a house. They have free access. We really treat them as part of our family, and we have an emotional connection to them. But I don't see myself pulling out a man's key and beating him up because he bounced my door accidentally, to be honest. But also, I think what people see as a race-based response was the response of the police, not necessarily the white family. You understand? So that is what is important. That is what angered me. That is what angered many people. Because had it been reversed, had it been a white family driving through Dabo or River Road or Bolio and bouncing a dog, and then a black family came out and pulled out the key and beat up the driver, they would have been charged. I'm telling you, I've been a criminal defense attorney for 5 years, and I know that because there is immediate evidence of a crime, i.e. assault, having been committed. So
you're looking at institutionalized racism or internalized white racism.
Internalized racism
on the part of the Grenada police.
That's the institutional.
Yeah, exactly. So it was just that, for two reasons. One, they were whites. Two, they lived in Fort Judy, which people see as kind of like upper class and hoity-toity. So the police just didn't want to sort of charge them. And if we really interrogate and dig down into why, it absolutely relates to racism.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to say, I am not Grenadian. I am also a UN staff member, so I cannot comment directly on what is happening. What I will say is we have to look at, again, the institutional ways in which our institutions that are supposed to serve and protect everyone serve and protect a few more than others. And this is the same that is happening in the state.
Same thing, absolutely.
Yeah,
With regards to whether whiteness and blackness had something to do with the reaction, I think every single thing that defines our characteristic, as Richie was saying, was going through everybody's mind when they responded. So no, all human beings, as we say, monkey know a tree to climb. They're sitting down thinking through, deciding whether they have enough power in a circumstance to get away with certain actions.
All right, we have a comment here on the chat that said, I couldn't believe the response of the police to Fort Judy incident. I think race influenced that response. I don't know if anybody else in the chat group would like to comment online, speak up on it. Raise your flag. There's Raheem Joseph. Is that you speaking?
Yes, ma'am.
Go right ahead, please, sir.
Yes, I would slightly disagree that it had everything to do with race when it came to the behavior of the police officer. One thing I will put out there, I'm not sure if Richie will agree with me, there is a serious lack of commitment in being an officer here in Grenada. Most of our officers merely see this as simply a job that they can just go through daily. When it really comes to serious issues of them actually putting their best foot forward into handling a situation, many of them take the fall back. And it has been like this for years. I'm not sure if anybody will disagree with me.
All right, can I respond?
Yeah, I was going to respond to.
No, go ahead, Dr. Graves.
No, not me.
Before Dr. Graves, there's somebody else trying to get in here. I can't see.
Yes, somebody was trying to. I wasn't trying to respond. Okay. I think somebody else was.
This is under the moniker of Sasha Pierre. Good day, everyone. I understand what Razim is saying, but what I want to offer is this. As was proffered before, if you reverse the races, what is the expected result, or what would have been the anticipated result? And it would not. I live in Montu. I'm not from Grenada. I've been residing here for some years now, so I consider myself somebody from Montu. And had it been somebody from Montu held somebody and beat them up, I know one or two young persons that were in jail and went to jail at young, tender ages because of thieving and stealing. And this is an assault on a Grenadian citizen, or not any citizen, but an assault on somebody. There's no this is something that the country or the state could say, no, you can't do this. And the police officers are the persons to determine, to use their discretionary power to do that. And in this case, they chose to use the discretion of not doing anything. And so the question begs, why not do something in this situation? What is the impetus for that versus other situations that we know and that we have evidence of, or we have experience of, where they do something about it? And it is that disparity in the dispensation of justice that the country is having an issue with, and that all of us in the world are having an issue with.
Excellently put.
And this is where the racist, or I should rather say, this is the racial policies and infrastructure kind of is partly to blame. I agree with Razim that there can be, if somebody is really true to their job and they really want to do their job properly, this thing shouldn't matter. Their racist tinge shouldn't matter. But that's not the world we live in. That's not the flavor of the world we live in. These institutions that were built highlighting persons of dark skin or of non-white skin to being highly associated with criminality. And if that's the only message you're getting, then it really doesn't matter what institution it is, whether it is the school, whether it is the whether it is in the hospital, whether it is inside the police service, you are going to get a bias against persons whose skin color is different.
So you raise, thank you very much, Speaker. You raised the question of justice. I want to switch then to another topic that was raised this afternoon, the question of reparations, which was put on the table. Now, we already know that there is a historical legacy. In fact, Haiti was forced to pay the four major powers of the day in the 1860s. It was forced to pay Germany, France, the Vatican, and the United States for the loss of
taking their independence, really.
For their independence. They had to pay dearly for it, and they only recently finished paying this foreign debt. And sometimes people say, well, why is Haiti so poor? The question now that has been put forward by the Caribbean community is not so much steeped in a blatant day-to-day interpersonal racism, but in the institution of slavery. There is need for compensation. I'd like to hear from some of our listeners about that, because it has raised controversy in the Black population. Let sleeping dogs lie, take responsibility for your last 60 years, and so on. Any comments on that? Any new thoughts on that?
I'd like to comment.
I also have to step off, so I would like to comment too before I leave. I'm sorry, I have this work-life balance. I have 2 little boys that I need to go to.
Yes, then can you please start? You get the privilege of your womanhood, your motherhood.
I appreciate the privilege. And listen, I revel in my womanhood. And actually, Richie, that was something I wanted to say as well. Just quickly, I don't think Black women are always at the bottom. We're at the bottom for different things, but there are a lot of things that we're leading on, and we have to be able to acknowledge that and look to that, you know?
I accept that.
I think I am not going to address the topic of reparations. I'm going to let everybody else discuss that. But I think what we need to be looking at is how we do 2 things. Take what we're doing at the local and national level and build on it regionally. The Pan-Africanist movement should not be a dream that is continuously deferred, as W.B. Du Bois would say. We have to really be building on each other. Most of us are connected in all kinds of ways anyway. Yeah. As Damien, as Richie, as another colleague on the line was saying, and me myself, we are Caribbean people. So we find Caribbean solutions that are really infused by what we have experienced in our different countries, so that we have a solution that is sustainable, right? Because there are good things happening in all of the different countries. But if right now we don't even have a way to connect ourselves, right? We don't have the ferry anymore, and we're not sure what's going to happen with Liad. We have to make sure that institutionally what we're doing, we're looking at our regional institutions as well, so that we are supporting them, we are building on what they're doing, and really come to a joint solution for gender equality and racial justice. I don't think we have to entwine them. The 2 of them are intricately entwined. And the last thing I want to say, and it's something that Hazel raised in the chat, fantastic moment for us to do what Michelle Obama says, which is go high, right?
Take the high road.
Take the high. And when I say take the high road, this does not mean do not hold people accountable. It Absolutely. Does mean that we take a moment and we make sure things are thoroughly investigated. There needs to be trust in our institutions to do the investigations accurately. But before we jump to any kind of a conclusion anywhere, we do need to make sure that we know what actually happened. Else we will be no better than what used to be the Salem witch hunts. These exist in our society. We know it anecdotally. We have some research already on it, and I will encourage people to look at the work at Dr. Nicosia Shakes, Angelique Nixon. There are a lot of people writing about the ways in which gender, class, and race have combined to see what we're seeing in our world right now. I just think let's be thoughtful about it. Let's continue to have the conversations, but let us be strategic, because it will not be a moment. We have to make this a pivotal movement so that change for all Grenadians, all people in the Caribbean, and all people in the world. White supremacy and patriarchy affects all people negatively, even white people who think they're privileged by it, and even men who think they're privileged by patriarchy. It is not any of us. So thank you all for letting me join your conversation. We will be continuing to have conversations like this. So please look at the UN Women Facebook page and website. We are going to be launching something soon around conversations, keeping it going. This conversation going. So thank you to this.
Thank you very much. And just as you call for continuity and connectedness, please put the resources of UN Women at our disposal so that we're able to do that.
Very good.
The technical resources are always with you.
Good shot.
We will do the best we can with the others. All right.
Good. Thank you. And
have a good night, everyone.
Yes, and a brilliant future to your children, that they will be race, class, and gender sensitive and empowered.
Right.
We'll do our best.
Thank you. Okay, so to continue, I see no new questions. I don't see any questions, but the chat box has been quite active. I wonder if we could speak again. Somebody was asking about our Creole French ancestors. Do they matter? And this is an important point, because it's when we say Black Lives Matter, sometimes the quick response is all lives matter. So Black Lives Matter, but French Creole ancestors, their lives matter. Now, does this empower the discussion around racism and race relations in the Caribbean? Or is this, as sometimes it's seen elsewhere, as an attempt, not a deliberate or mean attempt, but does it have an impact of deflating from the challenges faced by being of predominant African descent? What happens to because the Caribbean people are not purely of African descent. There are other races mixed in with that.
Absolutely, we have to take that into consideration, moderator, because this is part of our history, and even going as far back as the Amerindians, they are part of the whole thing. In fact, when we speak about reparations, we also have to include the Amerindians and our indigenous people and so on, because remember they were basically wiped out in some of our countries. Some have survived in Guyana, in the hinterland and so on, and other parts of the Caribbean and other parts of the world. But basically the first stroke of enslavement, if you want to put it that way, and getting rid of these people and ridding them of their wealth to ensure that Europe was wealthy, was to actually decimate the indigenous people. And so even if we talk about Black Lives Matter and so on, and we include reparations, as I attempted to do earlier on, and the Windrush affair, we cannot leave out our French Creole people, we cannot leave out our indigenous people. All of that is what the Caribbean Reparations Commission, led by Sir Hilary Beckles, is looking at. How can we deal with those issues? How can we ask Europe, particularly Britain and France, our colonizers, to look at our situation and say, listen, you got rid of our wealth, what we did in terms of enslavement and the extraction of whatever we had within the region, you used to enrich yourselves. Now we want you to come back to the Caribbean, the same place where you denuded us to come back now and help us in terms of a developmental project. So we're not asking for money, we're not asking for loans, we're not asking for grants, we're asking you to partner with us to be part of the developmental project of the region, which would include, of course, all the human rights issues and also taking care of some of the inequalities, the inequities, the injustices that we have been suffering. So I do not see a separation where that is concerned. I see a continuity. I see basically what I call convergence in terms of of the outcome that we are looking for.
I had Ms. Decima, I had a question. My hand was up on the chat, but I guess no one is looking at the hand raise.
I don't have the hand raise on my box. Sorry.
Can I go ahead?
Please.
Okay, this is Sandra Pay. I was actually I was hoping that Tony was on, but I know she had to leave. The question, I think it's a question and a comment. The fact that so many of us are still even thinking and talking about us, meaning not just us on the forum, but just us in terms of Grenada, are talking about whether or not race played a part in how the situation was handled in Fort Judy. The mere fact that we even thinking about it and talking about it as if for some people it doesn't, it means that we don't really understand exactly how much colonialism and racism has affected us as a people, how it has affected our institution, how it's affected us how we've internalized it throughout our lives. And I know Richie and some other people have raised it, and so I'm not going to be here to rehash it. What I'm so concerned about is how we then people in terms of the UN Women and all the other organizations, how we ourselves are now using platforms often that are built on the same colonial kind of framework to then shape our institutions. So we are using laws, we're using a lot of the stuff that are handed down to us from the US and so on. We are then in turn using these same kind of framework to determine about, issues around gender and gender violence, around issues of, women's health and sexuality and the kind of laws that's implemented. And I know we don't want to talk about religion here, but then how do we break from that? How do we create a platform where we can start thinking about determining laws and institutions that really are coming from us in terms of all the experiences that we have and kind of breaking from what we've been handed down, what has been handed down to us.
Thank you. Maybe the constitutional lawyer will respond to this, but I want to interject for purposes of being provocative the call by one of our citizens, Mr. Rollo, for a People's Assembly to rewrite the Constitution and probably tackle some of the issues that you mentioned. So let me, with that interjection, turn over to
all right. So just to initially address Rollo's position, I know he's of the understanding that our current constitution is illegitimate. We definitely disagree there academically. And so on the assumption, which is my position, that it is legitimate, part of the difficulty is that the constitution itself requires for it to be changed that there be a majority vote by referendum and a special parliamentary majority, which is exactly what the difficulty is, because the public referendum requires, in order for us to get the positive change that all of us here might agree with, that people just be educated and analytical to a particular level to be able to vote yes or no on particular issues. But I don't think that generally the population is very susceptible to propaganda and to political persuasion, which is certainly part of our issue. So it's not just a matter of creating a People's Assembly and establishing a constitution. I know Rollo has a different view, but this is certainly my view. To respond to the previous caller, I think there are two issues. The first is education reform. So developing a curriculum which really serves us as Caribbean people, which educates us to the extent that we can analyze our place contextually, historically, understand where we are, why we are here, and what it is and where it is we want to be. So I think as much as our current curriculum educates us and empowers us to be workers as such, we learn maths, English, chemistry, etc. I don't think that it really does that. The other thing is policy, which our governments are responsible for. So perhaps one of the responses is to elect people who will in fact put in place the policies to effect the changes that we want to see. Because let's take, for instance, the issue of child sexual abuse. How is our government addressing? Yes, there's a matter of the laws, but that, of course, depends on people reporting, on people investigating properly, on people prosecuting. There are many policy programs put in place to help the victims. But I was in a circle discussion a few weeks ago where one of the persons, Maureen Sinclair, actually, a good friend of mine who does work around and justice and community cohesion in Grenada, she has a question concerning the child abusers. Why do they do it? And I couldn't answer her. And I don't think that as a matter of policy, we've really looked into that, because we need to tackle them in the same way that it's important to tackle men as the majority perpetrators of domestic violence, and not only create space for women to seek protection orders. I think it's similarly important to have forums that involve men, which is why I think Caraman is extremely important. So I want to big up Peter Weller, who has always been driving the Caraman initiative, which seeks to really just focus on men and helping us work on our issues. But I would love to see more of that done at the policy level by government.
Thank you. There's been, just before you go again, Professor Graves, I'm so sorry, but Carl Theodore has been trying to get in this conversation for some time. Are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. A lot of things passed, but I will. I want to talk about I kind of bring it to the idea of the Caribbean identity. Where do we go? Where do we go from here as a Caribbean? As a Caribbean people, how do we? I think Sandra tried to bring up why are we using the same infrastructures that was handed down to us, which includes things like the Constitution, and as we have no. This is the situation that we're in. We found our independence. We got our independence. We earned our independence, and to have that independence, we declared a constitution, right? And we have it, and we agreed to it. But we also
we didn't declare a constitution. England gave it to us.
But for those who are independent, there's a change in the constitution from what was handed before. And that
not in Grenada, except during the revolutionary time, which doesn't matter for the purposes of our discussion.
Right, okay. So whatever the infrastructure is that we have right now, that's the infrastructure that we govern ourselves by. And in that infrastructure, we have to, as you rightly said, we have to use those political tools that there are in that institution to guide the change. And so to speak to Sandra's point, it's something. These are the tools that we have, and while they're imperfect tools, they are the way in which we can move forward and we can progress forward, right? But in a democracy, we hold consensus as a point, and to have that consensus, we have to have education, we have to have discourse, we have to have debate, we have to agree to disagree sometimes, but we also have to agree to keep on the table to talk, and not just leave things to just be and continue and expect it to be better, right? And so so just to kind of bring it back also then to a little more towards the issue on race and race relations and the institutional racism, understanding that system was established to maintain economic capacity and economic power of Europe, understanding that was why it was designed, and to maintain that we can say, okay, we see that was more intent, but we have different intents now that we have a little more control over our system. And our intent is to be, let's just say, this is a hypothetical, right? To be a people who take care of the people on the fringes, make sure that those who who don't have access or money to do things, don't have to pay for education, don't have to pay for healthcare, but to do that means we have to earn money, especially in this world. How do we do that? Well, we have to sell and buy things and engage in economic activity that the rest of the world does. We have to generate wealth. We have to protect that generation of wealth infrastructure. And as long as we don't focus on that part of it, but we get lulled by, oh well, we have a little bit of money, or we have or we need to get foreign exchange by any means necessary, and we start being lulled, oh, we want to buy a fancy car, and we get lulled by these things, and we take our eyes off the ball of being a self-sufficient region. Every time we do that, we push back our eventual progress to where we hope and we see ourselves. All of us, I hope. I don't want to make a broad statement like all of us, but I believe that people want a better situation for Caribbean people, right? The Caribbean has done well in this COVID-19. It is something that we have to be proud of, right? But that could have only happened because we had social cohesiveness. We had infrastructure understanding how to manage, how to trust our governments. If they said don't do such and such and such, not do it. As much as it was painful and as much as it was inconvenient, we believed in our collective good. And so we decided to trust that system, right? And there are other times that we have to trust that, we have to build upon that trust, and we have to build on that capacity, not just for our individual states, but also as a region. And as a region that is, as we said, connected by this common history and by blood, right? And by a lot of genetics. And so I think my point is that we kind of sometimes have to use what we're given to move forward. We have to recognize where it's not fitting us and we get rid of it, right? And then we replace it with things that are going to build a platform where we can move forward from it.
Thank you very much. In the remaining 10 minutes that we have, anyone who hasn't taken the floor yet and would like to do so, let me see if I could. Yes, there is a Valentine Douglas. And if you just touch your button, the next person, I will see that. Mr. Douglas, please go ahead.
You have to unmute the mic, Douglas.
Hold on, unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, more comments than anything else. I mean, I'm very impressed by all the points that were made this evening, and they were very, very, very impressive. But as I look at Black lives as it's related to Grenada, we this afternoon discussed the issue, and the primary issue here is colonialism and its effect on Grenada. Part of slavery, racism, classism, and all other ills there are. Now, how are we still have images of colonialism on us. It's there in our daily lives. We still, practice, awarding people titles and sort of reinforcing classism, knighting people and doing all of these things. Now, I think how to get rid of that, we need cultural changes. In the early 70s, we had Black Power and people were educated, they were socially aware, and they did things, they wore the Afro dashiki, and they were very educated as to what it meant to be a Black person. Right now, our culture isn't there. We, as they say, we in the KFC model as was described earlier on. And how do you get that cultural change now in Grenada? How do you get people who are still acting subservient, as we heard in the statements made in the Fort Judy thing, where the construction workers were describing what happened, from their perspective. I know we'd have policies, change of constitution, and all the other things that we can bring to force, but education has to be deep and it has to be culturally rooted, and I think a lot of the discussion that would ensue from that, the question becomes, how do we get this cultural change? That's basically my input for the evening.
Thank you. I'm sure we're going to think deeply on this. Let me tell you what UNESCO says about that. It says the relative lack of social recognition and appreciation of the histories of people of African descent, their heritage and their cultures, and the negative representation of people of African descent in education curricula, national cultures, and the media perpetuate the prejudices initiated and continued for centuries during the period of slavery and colonial.
I agree.
And this is part of the justification for the decade. And I would encourage all our participants to go online and look for the decade for people of African descent and begin to find your way through that, both in your homes, schools, organizations, and elsewhere. Is there another hand up? Okay.
Are you a small business and would like your business to grow? Do you have an event, products, or services that people should know about? Be wise. Advertise. Book your spot on GBN Shopping Guide. Be part of Grenada's biggest advertising medium, the Grenada Broadcasting Network. Call our sales department now on 440-2446 or 440-3033 or GBN plus the number sign.